The water was black glass under the Tanzanian moon when Dematerius Simpar waded in to untangle his fishing net. He'd done this 1,000 times before knee-deep, then waist-deep, the warm Rufiji River current tugging gently at his legs. The net was expensive. His family needed it. So he pushed deeper, fingers working the tangled nylon, eyes scanning for hippos in the darkness. He never thought to look down. The Nile crocodile that had been tracking him was 17 feet of prehistoric killing machinery. Lying motionless on the riverbed like a submerged log. When it struck, Dematerius didn't even see the jaws, just felt his entire leg disappear into a vise that compressed with 2 tons of pressure per square inch. The crocodile began the death roll. His femur snapped like kindling. Flesh tore away in ribbons. The last thing he remembered before blacking out was the sensation of being dragged backward into deeper water. His screams swallowed by the river, his blood painting black clouds in the moonlight. He would survive barely, but 16 others that year would not. Because unlike sharks that bite and release, unlike bears that maul and retreat, crocodiles are patient, calculated executioners that have perfected the art of drowning their prey for over 200 million years. If you're ready to witness nature's most ruthless predator in action, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss what lurks beneath the surface next. The crocodile attack is fundamentally different from every other animal assault on this planet. When a lion kills, it's over in minutes. When a snake strikes, venom does the work. But when a crocodile decides your food, you re-entering a nightmare that can last hours of slow-motion execution, or you reconscious for most of it, where the animal isn't frenzied or scared, but coldly methodical. These are reptiles whose basic body plan has needed to change since the Cretaceous period because they achieved evolutionary perfection before mammals even walked upright. Their jaw muscles are designed for one function only: closing with enough force to punch through buffalo's skull. A saltwater crocodile can exert 3,700 pounds of bite force, making it the strongest bite of any animal alive today. For context, a great white shark maxes out at around 600 pounds per square inch. A human, around 150. When those jaws close on human flesh, the teeth don't just pierce, they shear through muscle and pulverize bone on contact. And this is where our ranking begins, because not all crocodile attacks are created equal. Some victims escape with scars and stories, others are found in pieces. And some are never found at all. At number 10, we have the attack of Mann in Australia's Northern Territory, October 2003. Brett was camping with friends near the Mary River when he made the fatal mistake thousands make every year. He assumed the murky water was safe because he could unsee anything dangerous. He was waist-deep, washing his hands after cleaning fish, when the saltwater crocodile hit him from behind. This one was relatively small by salty standards maybe. 10 feet long, but size becomes irrelevant when teeth are punching through your abdomen. The crocodile latched onto Brett's torso and pulled him under. What saved him was the substrate. The riverbed was rocky, and as the crocodile tried to roll, Brett managed to wedge his feet between stones and hold himself in place. For 40 seconds, he fought underwater in complete darkness, the crocodile thrashing, trying to tear him into smaller pieces. His friends heard nothing. The water barely rippled. When Brett finally surfaced, gasping and bleeding from 8 puncture wounds across his stomach and ribs, the crocodile had simply released him and vanished. He would later say the most terrifying part wasn't the bites, it was the silence. The absolute absence of rage or fear from the animal. It was just testing him, calculating whether he was worth the effort. Number 9 takes us to Indonesia, to the mangrove swamps of East Kalimantan, where 41-year-old Deasy Tuwo met her end in January 2019. Deasy worked at a pearl farm and was intimately familiar with the saltwater crocodiles that patrolled the breeding ponds. She'd been warned never to feed them, never to establish patterns, never to let them associate humans with food. But every morning for 3 years, she'd walked the same narrow path along the same pond at the same time. Crocodiles don't have complex brains, but they have perfect memory for patterns. The crocodile that killed Deasy had been watching her for months, maybe years. It knew exactly where she'd step, exactly when. When it lunged from the water, it didn't grab her leg or our mitt grabbed her head. Witnesses said the jaws closed around her skull like a helmet, and she was gone beneath the surface before she could scream. Her co-workers found only her sandals. It took 3 days and a team of hunters to locate the crocodile. When they cut it open, they found Deasy's remains still largely intact in its stomach, because crocodiles don't chew. They swallow in chunks and let stomach acid do the work over weeks. The autopsy revealed she drowned while being held underwater in those jaws, meaning she was conscious and aware as water filled her lungs in absolute darkness. Rank 8 belongs to a series of attacks rather than a single incident, the Ramree Island Massacre of February 1945. This one blurs the line between military history and natural horror. During World War II, roughly 1,000 Japanese soldiers retreated into the mangrove swamps of Ramree Island off the coast of Burma, trying to escape advancing British forces. What they did unknow was that these swamps hosted one of the densest populations of saltwater crocodiles in Southeast Asia. The soldiers had no choice but to wade through chest-deep water in complete darkness, injured and exhausted. The crocodiles, which had rarely encountered humans before, suddenly found themselves surrounded by splashing, bleeding prey. British troops stationed nearby reported hearing screams throughout the night, not the screams of men dying in battle, but something worse. Something primal and drawn out. By morning, only 20 Japanese soldiers emerged from the swamp. The Guinness Book of World Records would later call it the greatest disaster suffered by humans from animals in recorded history. While historians debate the exact number of crocodile deaths versus gunfire or drowning, survivors all reported the same thing. The water came alive. Shapes moving between the trees. The sound of jaws snapping shut. And then silence as men simply disappeared beneath the surface, pulled down by reptiles that had no concept of war or mercy, only the opportunity to feed. At number 7, we meet Alicia Sorohan, a woman who survived but lost more than most. Alicia Sorohan was celebrating her 26th birthday in Queensland, Australia, when the Johnstone River crocodile took her arm. It was March 2004, and she'd been drinking with friends at a popular camping spot where tour guides regularly assured visitors the water was monitored and safe. The crocodile that attacked her was a 14-foot saltwater specimen that had been living undetected in that stretch of river for years, feeding on fish and wallabies, learning the rhythms of human activity. Alicia was sitting on a partially submerged rock, dangling her legs in the water, when the animal surged upward and clamped down on her right forearm. She described the initial bite as feeling like a car door slamming on her arm, not sharp pain, but massive blunt pressure that instantly fractured both bones. Then came the roll. Crocodiles use the death roll to disorient prey and tear off manageable chunks of meat, spinning their entire body along their longitudinal axis while keeping their jaws locked. Alicia spun with it, underwater, her arm twisting at angles arms aren't meant to twist. When she surfaced, gasping, she realized her hand was facing backward. The crocodile still had her. Her friends were screaming from shore, helpless. For reasons researchers still debate, the crocodile suddenly released her and sank away. Alicia staggered to shore with her arm hanging by tendons and shredded muscle. Surgeons would later amputate below the elbow. She considers herself lucky. The crocodile had been aiming for her torso and missed. Number 6 is where we enter the realm of attacks that involve children and hear the horror compounds exponentially. In June 2016, 2-year-old Lane Graves was playing in 6 inches of water at Disney World's Grand Floridian Resort in Florida when an American alligator 11 feet long pulled him under. His father, Matt Graves, was standing less than 3 feet away. He saw the ripples, saw his son's head go under, and lunged into the water. Matt actually grabbed the alligator's jaw and tried to pry it open. For context, an American alligator's bite force measures around 2,900 pounds per square inch. Matt Graves was trying to open a hydraulic press with his bare hands. The alligator pulled Lane backward into deeper water. Matt dove after them. He lost them in the murky darkness. 16 hours later, after dozens of alligators had been captured and euthanized from the Seven Seas Lagoon, divers found Lane's body intact about 10 feet from shore, submerged under 6 feet of water. The medical examiner concluded he died from drowning and traumatic injuries. The alligator had had drowned him and was likely waiting for the body to soften before consuming it. This is standard crocodilian behavior. They often store carcasses underwater, wedged under logs or rocks, waiting days or weeks for decomposition to make the meat easier to tear. Lane Graves was being stored like inventory. At number 5, we cross into the territory of Gustav, the legendary Nile crocodile of Burundi, who has become something between documented killer and mythical monster. Gustav is estimated to be over 70 years old, stretching more than 20 feet in length, weighing close to 2,000 pounds, and bearing the scars of bullets and spears from decades of hunting attempts. Researchers who've studied him say he's killed anywhere from 60 to 300 people. Though confirmed cases are difficult to verify in rural Burundi, where deaths often go unreported. What makes Gustav particularly terrifying isn't his size, it's his behavior. Most crocodiles are ambush predators that wait for prey to come to the water. Gustav actively hunts humans. He's been observed patrolling the Ruzizi River, following fishermen, approaching villages. In 2002, a team led by French crocodile expert Patrice Fay attempted to capture Gustav using a massive reinforced trap baited with live goats. Gustav destroyed it. He didn't just avoid it or ignore it, he deliberately smashed the cage and left without taking the bait, as if making a point. One of the most documented attacks attributed to Gustav occurred in 2008, when a fisherman named Mayoya was taken in front of his entire village. Witnesses said Gustav erupted from the water at dusk, grabbed Mayoya around the waist, and dragged him under so quickly that people initially thought he'd just slipped. They found pieces of his clothing downstream 3 days later. Nothing else. Gustav has become a ghost story that kills, a crocodile that seems to understand he's being hunted and has learned to hunt back. Number 4 brings us to perhaps the most harrowing survivor account in crocodile attack history, the ordeal of Paul Templar, a professional river guide in Zimbabwe's Zambezi River. It was March 1996, and Paul was leading a group of kayakers through what he believed was a safe section of river. He'd run this route hundreds of times. He knew where the hippos congregated, where the crocodiles basked. What he didn't account for was a territorial bull hippo having a particularly aggressive day. When the hippo charged their group, it capsized one of the kayaks, throwing a client into the water. Paul immediately dove in to rescue him. He got his hands on the panicking kayaker and was pushing him toward another boat when something enormous hit Paul from below. The impact felt like a car crash. He went under, completely disoriented, and then felt pressure immense, surrounding pressure. It took him several seconds to understand what was happening. He was inside a hippo's mouth. The animal had grabbed him around the waist and was biting down, its tusks puncturing his back and abdomen. But here's where this becomes relevant to our ranking. In the chaos of the attack, a Nile crocodile, attracted by the blood and commotion, decided to join in. As the hippo released Paul and he surfaced, gasping and shredded, the crocodile lunged from the side and clamped onto his right arm. Paul felt the teeth meet through his flesh, felt the bone crack. The crocodile pulled him under again. He was drowning now, blood pouring from multiple wounds, his vision tunneling. What saved him was the hippo attacking again, not him, but the crocodile, creating enough chaos that the croc released him and Paul managed to surface one more time. His colleagues dragged him from the water with his arm mangled beyond recognition, his torso punctured in 47 places, and his left lung collapsed. He survived 40 surgeries. His arm was amputated. And he remains one of the only people on record to have been attacked by both a hippo and a crocodile simultaneously and lived to describe it. The top 3 attacks on our list represent not just physical trauma, but psychological annihilation moments, where victims face the full prehistoric horror of being hunted by an apex predator that views humans not as threats or even equals, but as meat. These are the attacks that haunt researchers, that change legislation, that remind us we're only tourists in ecosystems we don't control. At number 3, we have the nightmare of Isabelle von Jordan, a German tourist whose death in Australia's Kakadu National Park in October 2002 sparked international outrage and forced a complete reassessment of crocodile management policies. Isabelle was 24 years old, a medical student traveling with friends, camping near sandy Billabong despite signs warning of saltwater crocodiles in the area. Late one night, after drinking around the campfire, she and her companions decided to go swimming. Guides had explicitly warned them. Signs were posted. But alcohol and the illusion of safety in numbers created a fatal combination. Isabelle waded into the water up to her waist. Her friends were laughing, splashing. She was approximately 15 feet from shore when the crocodile, a 14-foot male, struck with such speed that witnesses said she simply vanished. No scream, no splash. One moment she was there, and the next there was only disturbed water in the beam of their flashlights. Her friends immediately raised the alarm, but night searches for crocodile victims are nearly impossible. The water is black, the animal's invisible, and the victim is almost certainly already dead. Rangers found Isabelle's body the next morning, 50 yards downstream, partially submerged and anchored under a submerged log. The crocodile had drowned her, crushed her rib cage, and was in the process of storing her corpse for later consumption. The autopsy revealed she died within 3 minutes of being pulled under drowning, while being held in jaws that prevented her from struggling or surfacing. The crocodile was eventually trapped and euthanized, but the case became a watershed moment. It proved that even with warning systems, even with education, the primal human urge to enter water could override survival instinct. And crocodiles would be there, waiting with the patience of stone. Number 2 takes us to one of the most widely documented attacks in modern history. Captured partially on video and witnessed by dozens, the death of Cindy Waldron on Thornton Beach in Queensland, Australia, May 2016. Cindy was 46, visiting from New Zealand, and was wading in shallow water at dusk with a friend despite signs warning that the area was known crocodile habitat. This wasn't a remote river or hidden billabong. This was a tourist beach. But saltwater crocodiles don't respect human geography. They go where the food is, and Thornton Beach had become a hunting ground for a 15-foot female that had been sighted multiple times in preceding weeks. Cindy and her friend Leanne Mitchell were waist-deep in the water, watching the sunset, when Leanne heard Cindy scream. She turned to see her friend being dragged backward, a massive crocodile clamped onto her body. Leanne lunged forward, grabbing Cindy's arms, trying to pull her back. For several seconds, they were locked in a tug-of-war, 2 middle-aged women versus 2,000 pounds of predatory reptile. Leanne could see the crocodile's eyes above the waterline, expressionless and yellow. She could feel the immense strength pulling from the other side, feel Cindy's arms slipping through her grip. Then the crocodile rolled, and Cindy's body twisted violently. Leanne lost her grip. Cindy disappeared beneath the surface and never resurfaced. Leanne staggered to shore, screaming for help, her hands shredded from gripping so hard. Emergency services arrived within 20 minutes. Helicopters scanned the water. Rangers deployed boats. But Cindy Waldron was gone. For 5 days, authorities searched the coastline and river systems. They found nothing. The crocodile had either consumed her entirely or stored her body so effectively that it would never be recovered. What makes this attack rank so high is unjust the brutality that Leon Mitchell had to feel her friend being torn away from her. Had to experience the helplessness of fighting an animal whose strength makes human effort meaningless. Leon would later describe the sound of Cindy's screams being cut off as she went under. The sudden silence, the way the water just smoothed over as if nothing had happened. She said it was like watching someone fall through ice into another dimension. 1 second, they're there. The next, they're erased from existence. Now we arrive at the worst crocodile attack ever documented. The case that represents the absolute apex of crocodilian horror, the death of Kerry McLoughlin in the waters of Arnhem Land, Northern Territory, Australia, in December 1987. Kerry was 40 years old, an experienced outdoorsman and commercial fisherman who understood crocodiles and respected their territory. But on that December afternoon, he made one small miscalculation that would cost him everything. He was fishing with a friend from a small aluminum dinghy in a tidal river known for its massive saltwater crocodile population. The fishing was good. They'd been out for hours. As the sun began to set, Kerry decided to cool off. He didn't dive in, he knew better than that. He simply leaned over the side of the boat and trailed his arms in the water up to his elbows, letting the current run over his hands. His friend, sitting at the other end of the boat, was checking their catch and not watching. The crocodile that attacked Kerry was later estimated at 19 feet long. Weighing over a ton, one of the largest saltwater crocodiles ever recorded in that region. It came from directly beneath the boat, surging upward with its mouth already open. It didn't grab Kerry's arms. It grabbed his entire upper body, the jaws closing around his chest and shoulders. The impact capsized the boat. Kerry's friend was thrown into the water, flailing and panicking. He surfaced just in time to see Kerry in the crocodile's jaws, still conscious, his face contorted in pain and terror, being dragged backward through the water. Their eyes met for perhaps 2 seconds. Kerry's friend said he would never forget the look, not pleading, not even scared anymore, but resigned. The knowledge that this was the end. Then the crocodile rolled, and Kerry went under. His friend managed to right the capsized boat and climb in, hyperventilating and scanning the water. He never saw Kerry again. Not his body. Not his clothes. Nothing. A massive search operation was launched at first light, involving helicopters, boats, and professional hunters. They never found a single trace of Kerry McLoughlin. The crocodile had taken him to the bottom, drowned him, and either consumed him entirely over the following weeks or stored him so deep in the mangrove root systems that recovery was impossible. What elevates this to the #1 position is just the size of the crocodile, or the complete disappearance of the victim the psychological torment of the survivor who had to watch his friend be carried away to a death he could unprevent, could witness, could even verify. Kerry McLoughlin simply ceased to exist, erased by a predator that left no evidence. No closure, no remains for his family to bury. The death of Kerry McLoughlin remains the gold standard of crocodile attack horror because it encapsulates everything that makes these animals uniquely terrifying among Earth's predators. Let's dissect exactly what happened in those final moments, using what we understand about crocodilian predation and the physiology of drowning. When that 19-foot saltwater crocodile clamped down on Kerry's chest and shoulders, his ribs didn't just break, they imploded. The pressure was distributed across his entire thoracic cavity, compressing his lungs like squeezing a balloon. Survivors of similar attacks who've been released describe the sensation as being unable to draw breath even when their mouth is above water because the chest cavity physically cannot expand against that pressure. Kerry would have experienced this immediately, the desperate, primal need to breathe while being completely unable to do so. Then came the drag. Crocodiles don't pull their prey down gently. They yank backward with the force of an industrial winch, using their massive tail for propulsion. Kerry went from open air to 6 feet underwater in less than 2 seconds. The shock of cold water flooding his nose and throat would have triggered the mammalian dive reflex, causing his larynx to spasm. Chetan evolutionary adaptation meant to prevent drowning, but in this case, simply prolonging his consciousness as his body began to suffocate. And he was still in those jaws, still feeling every tooth puncturing deeper as the crocodile adjusted its grip. Here's what most people don't understand about death by crocodile. You don't die quickly. The animal isn't trying to kill you efficiently. It's trying to drown you while keeping you intact enough to store and consume later. This means Kerry McLoughlin was likely conscious for 3 to 5 minutes underwater, held in absolute darkness, his lungs screaming for air, his body flooding with carbon dioxide and panic hormones. The crocodile would have held him near the bottom, occasionally shaking him not violently, but with enough force to disorient and weaken. Kerry would have felt himself fading, his vision tunneling even in the darkness, his movements becoming sluggish as hypoxia shut down his motor control. The final minute before brain death would have been a strange hallucinatory calm as his neurons began firing randomly, possibly creating vivid imagery or childhood memories. The brain's last desperate attempt to make sense of input that no longer matters. Then nothing. His body went limp. The crocodile, which had been monitoring his struggles through pressure sensors in its jaw, would have recognized the cessation of movement. Prey secured. Now came the storage phase. Saltwater crocodiles are known to wedge large kills under submerged logs or in undercut banks, creating natural refrigerators where the body will decompose slowly in the cool water, making the flesh easier to tear apart. The crocodile that killed Kerry likely dragged him a quarter-mile downstream through the mangrove channels, navigating by memory to a spot it had used before, a tangle of roots in 8 feet of murky water where sunlight never penetrates. It would have pushed Kerry's body deep into this organic cave, using its snout and claws to ensure he was properly wedged. Then it simply swam away. Crocodiles don't guard their food obsessively like mammals. They know where it is. They know other crocodiles can smell it, but likely won't risk confrontation over a claimed kill. The animal would have returned hours or days later, torn off whatever portions it could manage, and swallowed them whole. A full-grown human contains approximately 50 pounds of consumable meat after accounting for bones and indigestible material. That crocodile could have been feeding on Kerry McLoughlin for 3 weeks before the body was reduced to skeletal fragments that fish and invertebrates would finish. This is why he was never found. He wasn't hidden in some inaccessible location. He was consumed systematically, underwater in a root system that spans miles of mangrove coastline. Even if divers had swum within 10 feet of him, they wouldn't have seen anything but shadows and tangled wood. The psychological aftermath for Kerry's friend rivals the physical horror. Imagine climbing back into that capsized boat, soaking wet, knowing your friend is somewhere beneath the water, dying or already dead, and there's nothing you can do. The boat's motor wouldn't start flooded from the capsizing. He had to paddle 3 miles back to their camp using his hands, scanning the water constantly, expecting the crocodile to return for him. Every ripple was a potential attack. Every floating log was teeth. When he finally reached shore and called for help, he had to explain what happened, knowing how insane it sounded. He had to describe watching his friend disappear into a monster's jaws like something from a movie, except this was real and his friend wasn't coming back. The guilt was overwhelming. He'd been checking fish while Kerry cooled his arms in the water. If he'd been watching, he'd yelled a warning. If they'd left an hour earlier. The rational mind knows these what-ifs are meaningless. Crocodile attacks happen in seconds, and human reaction time is too slow. But survivor guilt doesn't operate on logic. For years afterward, Kerry's friend couldn't go near water. The sound of waves triggered panic attacks. He'd wake up screaming, having dreamed he was being pulled under, feeling those jaws close around him instead. This is the hidden casualty of crocodile attacks. The people who witness them and survive carry a specific kind of trauma that does unfade. What makes the McLoughlin case even more disturbing is how routine it should have been to avoid. Kerry wasn't swimming, he wasn't diving. He wasn't even dangling his legs over the side like so many victims do. He was trailing his hands in the water from a boat, something thousands of people do every day across northern Australia. But crocodiles don't need much. They've been documented attacking people who merely wade ankle deep. They've grabbed fishermen who lean over the water to unhook catches. There's a recorded case in the Northern Territory of a crocodile launching itself 3 feet out of the water to snatch a woman standing on a dock. These animals can explode from underwater to full aerial breach in less than half a second, covering distances of 15 feet horizontally. Their strike speed has been measured at 25 miles per hour from a stationary start. For comparison, the average human reaction time to a visual stimulus is about 250 milliseconds, quarter of a second. By the time your brain registers the water moving, processes that something is wrong, and sends the signal to your muscles to move, the crocodile's jaws are already closing. You don't dodge a crocodile attack. You survive it by luck, or you don't survive at all. Kerry McLoughlin had no luck that day. He had a split second of recognition, a moment of eye contact with his friend that communicated everything. And then he was gone erased so completely that even his bones were never recovered, consumed by the oldest predator design on Earth, an animal that kills the same way today as it did when dinosaurs still walked the continents. The aftermath of these attacks extends far beyond the victims themselves, rippling through communities, policies, and our fundamental understanding of where humans stand in the natural hierarchy. In the wake of Kerry McLoughlin's disappearance, Australian authorities implemented stricter protocols for waterway signage and crocodile monitoring, but the core problem remains unsolvable. Crocodiles are reclaiming territory they've occupied for millions of years, and human expansion continues pushing into their domain. Since the species gained protected status in 1971 after being hunted nearly to extinction, saltwater crocodile populations have exploded across northern Australia. Current estimates suggest over 100,000 individuals now inhabit the coastline and river systems, with the largest concentration in the Northern Territory where Kerry died. And they're getting bolder. Rangers report increasing incidents of crocodiles entering urban areas, swimming in harbors, basking on boat ramps in broad daylight. This isn't aggression, it's acclimation. A generation of crocodiles has grown up without fearing humans, viewing us as just another component of the environment. Some researchers argue we're witnessing the early stages of what they call opportunistic human predation, where crocodiles specifically incorporate humans into their hunting patterns, learning our behaviors and schedules the same way they learn where wallabies drink at dawn. The long-term medical consequences for attack survivors like Alicia Sorohan and Templar go far beyond missing limbs. Crocodile bites introduce horrific bacterial loads into wounds. These animals spend their lives in stagnant tropical water, feeding on rotting carcasses, their mouths teeming with pathogens that include antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria found nowhere else in nature. Survivors universally develop severe infections requiring months of intravenous antibiotics. Flesh dies and must be debrided repeatedly, meaning surgeons cut away blackened tissue in procedures that are essentially controlled mutilation. Templar underwent 40 surgeries over 3 years, each one removing more damaged tissue, reshaping what remained, fighting infections that kept returning. He lost his arm not from the initial bite, but from necrosis that spread despite treatment. The tissue had been so thoroughly crushed and contaminated that it was fundamentally unsalvageable. And then there's the phantom pain, the neurological ghost of limbs that no longer exist but still scream in agony. Survivors report feeling the crocodile's teeth clamping down years after the attack, waking from nightmares where they're still underwater, still being shaken like a rag doll, still drowning. PTSD rates among crocodile attack survivors approach 90%, higher than combat veterans. because the trauma is so visceral and the threat remains omnipresent in their environment. The evolutionary horror of crocodilians lies in their absolute perfection as ambush predators. While mammals evolved intelligence and social complexity, while birds developed flight and complex communication, crocodiles simply perfected patience. Their metabolism is so efficient they can survive a full year without eating. They can hold their breath for up to 7 hours while waiting motionless on a river bottom. Their eyes and nostrils are positioned on top of their skull, allowing them to observe prey while 98% of their body remains submerged and invisible. They have a transparent third eyelid that protects their eyes underwater while maintaining vision. They can detect pressure changes in water from hundreds of feet away using integumentary sense organs along there. Jaw and body, meaning they feel you entering the water before they see you, sensing the ripples and disturbances you create with nerve clusters more sensitive than human fingertips. And their brain, while small and primitive compared to mammals, is exquisitely optimized for one task: calculating strike distance and probability of successful capture. Studies using tracking devices have shown that large saltwater crocodiles will follow potential prey for hours or even days, staying just out of sight, learning patterns, waiting for the optimal moment. This isn't hunting. It's warfare conducted with geological patience. The deadliest crocodile attacks in recorded history cluster in specific regions where human poverty forces interaction with dangerous waterways. The Ramree Island massacre may hold the record for a single event, but the ongoing death toll in sub-Saharan Africa dwarfs all other regions combined. Nile crocodiles kill an estimated 300 to 700 people annually across their range, with the highest concentrations in Tanzania, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. In Lake Tanganyika alone, researchers documented 67 fatal attacks between 2010 and 2015, more than one per month. These aren't tourists ignoring warning signs. These are subsistence fishermen who have no choice but to enter the water. Women washing clothes on riverbanks because there's no plumbing. Children playing in shallows because there are no playgrounds. The attacks are so common they barely make local news anymore. Bodies are found partially consumed, cached in root systems, or not found at all. Families mourn and move on because crocodiles are simply part of the environment, as inevitable as drought or disease. International conservation groups face an impossible dilemma. Crocodiles are critically important apex predators that regulate entire ecosystems, but they're also killing impoverished humans at rates that dwarf shark attacks, bear maulings, and venomous snake bites combined. How do you protect both species when they fundamentally cannot coexist in close proximity? The theories about why certain crocodiles become prolific human eaters remain contentious. Gustav, the legendary Burundian man-eater we discussed earlier, represents one hypothesis. Injury or old age forces crocodiles to target easier prey. Gustav bears bullet wounds and spear scars from decades of hunting attempts, and some researchers believe these injuries make it difficult for him to hunt traditional prey like antelope and fish, pushing him toward slower, less alert humans. But other data contradicts this. Some of the most devastating attacks involve healthy, prime-age crocodiles in their physical peak. An alternative theory suggests that once a crocodile successfully kills and consumes a human, it simply adds humans to its mental menu of viable prey items. Crocodiles learn from experience with perfect memory retention. If it worked once, it will work again. This creates the terrifying possibility that every fatal attack potentially creates a specialist human hunter that will continue targeting people until it's removed or killed. In Australia, any crocodile confirmed to have attacked a human is immediately hunted down and euthanized for exactly this reason, not as punishment, but as pragmatic threat elimination. But in regions without resources for systematic hunting, these animals remain in the wild indefinitely, accumulating human kills across decades like Gustav, becoming local legends that transition into mythology even while continuing to kill very real victims. The future of human-crocodile conflict looks increasingly dire as climate change alters habitats and human population density continues increasing in tropical regions. Rising sea levels are pushing saltwater crocodiles further inland through tidal river systems. Prolonged droughts concentrate both humans and crocodiles around shrinking water sources. And tourism continues expanding into remote areas where these animals have rarely encountered humans, creating dangerous learning opportunities for curious crocodiles. Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands are experiencing rising attack rates as development reaches previously isolated coastlines. India's Sundarbans region, home to both Bengal tigers and saltwater crocodiles, sees dozens of attacks annually on honey collectors and fishermen working in the mangrove forests. And in Central America, American crocodiles, long considered less aggressive than their saltwater and Nile cousins, are exhibiting increasingly bold behavior, attacking swimmers in resort areas and pulling livestock from riverbanks. The common thread is human encroachment, creating habituation. Every close encounter that does result in negative consequences for the crocodile teaches it that humans are nothing to fear. And once that fear vanishes, we become what we've always been in evolutionary terms: slow, awkward prey operating in an environment where we have no natural advantage. The worst crocodile attacks ever recorded aren't historical curiosities or freak accidents. They're ongoing catastrophes happening right now in slow motion across every tropical region of the planet. They're Kerry McLoughlin being erased without a trace in Australia. They're Deasy Tuwo's skull crushed in Indonesian breeding ponds. They're Cindy Waldron slipping through her friend's fingers into Queensland darkness. They're nameless African fishermen taken every week in waters they have no choice but to enter. And behind every documented death are dozens of missing persons whose disappearances are never investigated, never confirmed. Never counted people who simply fail to come home one evening and are presumed lost to the water, their families never knowing whether they drowned, were taken by crocodiles, or met some other fate. These animals have been killing us for 200 million years, long before we were even recognizably human. And they'll be killing whatever comes after us long after we're gone. Because crocodiles don't evolve to meet new challenges. They wait for the world to come to them. And it always does. But what if I told you there's something even worse waiting in the shadows of the water? Something that makes these ancient reptiles look almost merciful by comparison. Click the video on screen right now. The most painful stings ever ranked box jellyfish to stonefish.